powerful emotional moment occurred at one of the world's most luxurious hotels. Serena Williams, a name synonymous with strength, success, and resilience, found herself standing outside a five-star hotel, not by choice, but because of the actions of one man. A guard, blinded by prejudice, looked her up and down, making a snap decision that would come to haunt him. But how could he, in his moment of authority, be so wrong? What happened when Serena Williams, a legend of the tennis world, was denied entry at the very moment she had every right to be there? This story will leave you questioning the nature of prejudice and redemption. Serena Williams is more than just a tennis player. She's an icon. Known for her powerful serves, unmatched tenacity, and incredible achievements in the world of sports, she has become a symbol of excellence. Off the court, Serena is just as formidable, breaking barriers, supporting causes, and challenging societal norms. But despite her fame and accomplishments, she, like many others, faces prejudice and discrimination. For Serena, it's not just about being a woman or being an athlete. It's about being a black woman in a world that sometimes isn't ready to recognize her greatness. On this day, Serena is arriving at a luxury hotel in the heart of a glamorous city, anticipating a peaceful stay after a long journey. Her expectations are simple: a warm welcome, a smooth check-in, and a moment of rest. But the guard at the door, stationed in front of the hotel, doesn't see her the way the world does. He doesn't see Serena Williams, the tennis champion, the multimillionaire, the trailblazer. Instead, he only sees the color of her skin, which leads him to make a rash decision that will not only change her experience, but will challenge the guard's views in an instant. The guard, a middle-aged man with a sharp uniform and a cold gaze, has spent years working in this high-end establishment, used to the wealth and power that walks through the lobby every day. He's seen it all: celebrities, executives, politicians, people who appear on the covers of magazines and hold sway in society. But something about Serena's presence at the entrance feels out of place to him. She doesn't fit the image of the elite guests he's used to seeing. She's a woman, but more importantly, she's a black woman, and to him, that's enough to question her right to be there. His initial hesitation turns into action when he steps forward and blocks her entrance, asking for identification in a dismissive tone. Serena, caught off guard and frustrated by the unnecessary scrutiny, remains calm. She doesn't argue. Instead, she waits. Little does the guard know, he's about to learn a powerful lesson in humility and empathy, one that will change the course of his day and perhaps his life. The setting is a grand luxury hotel situated in a bustling metropolis where wealth and prestige flow as freely as the traffic. The lobby is lavish: polished marble floors, gleaming chandeliers, and expensive artwork that lines the walls. The staff are well-dressed, their movements precise and practiced as they cater to the well-heeled patrons who pass through. Outside, the city hums with activity: luxury cars parked in front, high-end boutiques beckoning shoppers, and the sense that this is a world reserved for those who've reached the pinnacle of success. But the real tension starts when Serena, despite her fame and influence, is treated as an outsider. As she stands at the entrance, the grand facade of the hotel contrasts sharply with the small-mindedness of one man who is about to challenge everything she stands for. It's a moment that's almost cinematic in its build-up, two worlds colliding in the most unexpected way. The tension between the two characters, Serena Williams, a world-class athlete, and the guard, an ordinary man with prejudices, becomes the heart of this story. Serena is no stranger to racism, but this experience in the heart of a luxury hotel takes her by surprise. She has dealt with the systemic challenges in the world of tennis, and as a celebrity, she's used to being recognized. But this moment stands out. Her reputation, Her success and her worth should have been enough to earn her entry into this hotel, but instead, she's met with suspicion and bias. What follows will not only expose the racism embedded in everyday life, but also reveal the profound impact of those moments when people confront their assumptions and the consequences when they don't. The guard's snap judgment is about to unravel in a way neither he nor Serena could have predicted, and the lessons learned will be both humbling and empowering. The guard, Marcus, had seen countless celebrities and powerful individuals pass through the doors of the hotel, each one treated with deference and respect. He had been stationed at this luxury hotel for years, and though he prided himself on maintaining a firm grip on his duties, there was an undeniable edge of superiority he carried with him. It wasn't just the uniform that gave him this sense of power, it was the look in his eyes, the way people would often nod in acknowledgement as they passed through. He believed his role as a gatekeeper was sacred, ensuring that only the right people made their way through the lavish lobby of the hotel. As Serena Williams stepped out of the black SUV and approached the hotel entrance, Marcus was finishing a conversation with a colleague, a woman who had just come off her shift. His eyes automatically scanned the area, catching sight of the towering figure of Serena in the distance. His first thought was simply one of curiosity. She looked out of place. She was a woman, yes, but she wasn't dressed in the designer clothing, the flawless suits, or the glossy appearances of the typical guests who frequented this hotel. Serena was in a smart but relatively modest ensemble, black pants, a simple shirt, and sneakers, hardly what someone who belonged in such an exclusive setting would wear. He didn't recognize her immediately, but there was something about her that didn't sit right with him. In his mind, a woman who had achieved such a level of fame and wealth should have been surrounded by handlers, photographers, and a much higher profile. Serena, for her part, hadn't been expecting to face a challenge just to enter a hotel. She had just come off a long flight and was in no mood to deal with nonsense. Her reputation as one of the greatest athletes of all time should have been enough to get her past the front door without question. However, she knew better than to think that she could rely on the world's assumptions about who she was to make things easier. It wasn't the first time that she had felt her worth diminished in subtle ways, and while it angered her, she had learned long ago to pick her battles. But as she neared the entrance, the guard stepped in her way, his posture stiff and imposing. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked, his voice gruff, eyeing her skeptically. Serena stopped short, taken aback. Her gaze shifted between the guard and the entrance. There was a momentary silence, a strange tension hanging in the air. Was he asking if she needed help with directions, or something else entirely? The look in his eyes suggested something more, suspicion perhaps. She hadn't done anything wrong. "I'm here to check in," Serena said, her voice calm but firm. She could already feel the irritation building within her chest. Why was she being questioned? "Do you have your reservation?" Marcus asked, raising an eyebrow. There was something in his tone that Serena couldn't quite place, a dismissiveness, a lack of respect. It wasn't like the way the staff typically greeted her in high-end establishments. There was no recognition of her accomplishments, no acknowledgement of who she was. "Yes, I do," Serena said, pulling out her phone to show him her booking details. "Serena Williams, I have a reservation under my name." Marcus took a moment to look at her phone, his eyes scanning the details before shifting back to her. He made no attempt to acknowledge her as a guest of honor, as a world-class athlete, or as someone who had influenced the global sports community for over 2 decades. His eyes instead focused on her appearance, her clothing, and the apparent mismatch between what she looked like and what he assumed she should be. "Serena Williams," he repeated, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Right, and you are?" "I'm Serena Williams," she repeated, more forcefully this time. There was no mistake. He had heard her correctly, and she shouldn't have to repeat herself, especially not in a place like this. Marcus's expression remained cold, almost indifferent. "I'm sorry, Mom, but I'll need to check this with the front desk. You can't just walk in without confirming your identity." It was an odd request. Serena, feeling a wave of frustration rush over her, didn't immediately react. Instead, she stood still, her eyes narrowing. Something about this was all wrong. She had been to enough hotels to know how things should go, especially for someone of her caliber. This was no ordinary misstep. This was deliberate. As Marcus stepped away to make a phone call, Serena felt a pang of humiliation. It wasn't the first time she had encountered racism, but this felt different. This wasn't some isolated incident in the streets or a passing comment from someone who didn't know better. This was happening in a hotel that prided itself on catering to high-profile guests. The fact that she, Serena Williams, was being treated this way, questioned and scrutinized as if she were just another ordinary person off the street, cut deeper than she wanted to admit. As she stood there waiting for Marcus to return, her thoughts ran wild. The experiences that had led her to this moment flashed through her mind. The countless times her ability had been questioned, her physical appearance dismissed, her achievements undermined. No matter how much success she accumulated, no matter how many barriers she shattered in her career, she was still seen by some as less than. This was just one more painful reminder of the racism that existed beneath the surface of society. And yet, Serena held herself steady. She could feel the anger rising within her, but she knew how to control it. She had learned long ago not to let her emotions overpower her in situations like this. Fighting back with anger wouldn't help her here, but it didn't stop her from feeling it. When Marcus returned, there was a brief silence before he spoke again. He had confirmed her reservation and now seemed to be acting with more courtesy, but the damage had been done. Serena could tell by the forced politeness in his tone that his attitude had changed, but not without lingering suspicion. "Thank you for your patience," Marcus said. "Your room is ready. Let me escort you inside." As Serena made her way into the lobby with Marcus, she was still processing what had just happened, but she could see the shift in the guard's demeanor as they walked together. His posture had become more rigid, and his previous nonchalance had disappeared. There was a subtle change in the air, the realization that he had been wrong. She could feel the weight of his regret pressing in, but he didn't know how to address it. How could he? He had made an awful mistake, and he knew it. When they reached the elevator, Marcus hesitated. Serena glanced at him, noticing his stiff demeanor. His earlier attitude of superiority had melted away, replaced with something that resembled discomfort. "I apologize for the inconvenience, Ms. Williams," he said quietly, his voice strained. "I didn't recognize you, and I made an error in judgment." His words were genuine, but they felt almost too little too late. There was no excuse for what had just transpired. Serena looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Yes, you did," she said, her voice still calm but laced with the sharpness of someone who had been disrespected. She didn't say more. She didn't have to. The message was clear. For a moment, there was an awkward silence between them, the hum of the elevator serving as the only sound. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, still processing the realization that the woman he had just doubted, the one he had placed under scrutiny, was someone he should have immediately recognized. He had dismissed her, judging her based on her appearance, without a second thought. And now, as the weight of his actions sank in, he felt ashamed. He had underestimated someone who was undeniably worthy of respect. As the elevator doors closed, Marcus realized something profound. This wasn't just a moment of failure, it was a chance to change. He had learned an important lesson. not from Serena herself, but from the humbling experience of having his prejudice laid bare. The truth was uncomfortable, but Marcus couldn't deny it. The assumption that Serena didn't belong was rooted in his own biases, and it had cost him his dignity. Serena, for her part, didn't hold on to the anger for long. She wasn't here to lecture anyone, and she wasn't looking for an apology. What mattered was how things played out from here on. Would Marcus learn from this? Would he challenge the assumptions that had clouded his judgment? That was the real test. Serena had lived a life where lessons came in all forms, on the tennis court, in the boardroom, and even in moments like these. This wasn't the first time she had been disrespected, but it would always be a reminder that racism and prejudice could show up anywhere, even in the most unlikely places, even from those who should know better. As the elevator ascended, Serena stood tall, her head high. This moment wouldn't define her. She had fought too many battles to let one guard's ignorance take away her peace. But she knew that as long as there were people like him in the world, there was still work to be done. And she, Serena Williams, would continue fighting, not just for herself, but for every person who ever had to face the same judgment. She would continue winning, on the court and off. Serena Williams stepped out of the elevator into the hotel's grand lobby, her shoes clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. She held her head high, every stride an assertion of her strength and resilience. But inside, the experience of being questioned, doubted and scrutinized for no reason other than the color of her skin still stung. The luxury hotel, with its high-end furnishings and gleaming chandeliers, now felt distant and foreign, something she had earned the right to walk into, yet had been forced to fight for. Marcus, the guard who had blocked her entry moments ago, followed behind her, now walking with a noticeably different energy. He had apologized, but the words felt hollow, too little, too late. It wasn't just about this moment. It was the cumulative weight of all the times people like him had passed judgment without understanding. As they approached the front desk to finalize her check-in, Serena noticed the subtle shift in the room's energy. The staff who had once avoided eye contact with her now watched, some pretending to be busy, others glancing over curiously. Serena didn't flinch. She had long grown used to the silent judgments that followed her wherever she went, but the sting of Marcus's behavior still lingered. Marcus stepped up to the front desk, muttering something to the attendant in a hushed voice, and Serena stood silently, processing what had just transpired. She didn't want to make a scene. She didn't want to be the angry black woman in the room. But what had happened here, what had happened to her, was more than just a slight. It was an indictment of a world that still saw her as other, as someone unworthy of the respect and recognition she had more than earned. Just as she was about to turn toward the concierge to speak about the situation, the hotel manager, a sharply dressed man in his 40s, appeared from behind the counter. His polished suit and slicked-back hair exuded the kind of arrogance that Serena had encountered many times before, an arrogance that had always been grounded in assumptions about people who looked like her. "Ms. Williams," the manager began, his voice low and polite but laced with something more insidious, his underlying tone of apology veiled by politeness. "I understand you had some trouble getting in." Serena turned to face him, her eyes narrowing. "You could say that." The manager gave a nervous smile. "It's a mistake, but the guard has been informed that he shouldn't have questioned you. He's been corrected." Serena's voice was quiet, but her words rang with an unmistakable edge. "It's not just about being corrected. He tried to humiliate me, and you, the hotel staff, stood by and did nothing." There was a tense silence between them. The manager's smile faltered, and for a brief second he seemed at a loss for words. He had expected a simple complaint, maybe an apology, but not this. He hadn't expected Serena Williams to call him out, Not with such composure, not with such clarity of purpose. It was as if her presence alone had exposed every flaw in the way his hotel operated. "I'm terribly sorry for the inconvenience," the manager said, his voice weak, lacking the confidence it had moments ago. "But we are more than willing to ensure your stay is—" Serena cut him off sharply. What happens when someone like him, someone who works here, makes a mistake like this? Is there any accountability? The manager stammered, unsure of how to respond. "I'll make sure this doesn't happen again. I'll speak with the security department." Serena's frustration bubbled over, the weight of years of experience with these moments of subtle racism becoming unbearable. The apology didn't fix the damage. The words didn't undo the assumption that had been made. Serena was tired of the polite apologies that came with an unspoken promise of more of the same. This wasn't the first time she had faced this, being doubted, being questioned, being made to feel small. But this moment, in this luxury hotel, felt like a breaking point. Then something unexpected happened. Just as the manager attempted to speak again, Marcus, the guard who had stopped her at the door, stepped forward, his posture tense. He looked at Serena with a mix of guilt and recognition. I need to apologize again, Ms. Williams," he said, his voice low and filled with hesitation. "What I did earlier was wrong. I made a judgment about you and I shouldn't have. You don't deserve to be treated like that." Serena froze. She had been prepared for him to remain silent or offer a rehearsed apology, but hearing him admit to his mistake in such a direct way caught her off guard. The sincerity in his voice was raw, stripped of the defensive excuses that people often offered in moments like these. It was clear that he had realized the gravity of his actions, and it hit him harder than he expected. "I don't expect your forgiveness," Marcus continued, his words shaky, "but I wanted to tell you that I see you now. I see who you are, and I regret what I did." Serena stared at him for a long moment, her emotions shifting from frustration to something more complicated. She could feel her anger subsiding, replaced by a quiet, unexpected recognition of his vulnerability. There was no denial, no minimizing the situation. He had admitted his mistake, and for the first time Serena could see that he understood the weight of his actions. For a moment, the room was still. Even the hotel manager, who had been trying to regain control of the situation, seemed unsure of how to react. The tension that had been hanging in the air seemed to soften. Serena finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Thank you for your apology," she said. "But just because you say you see me now doesn't mean the damage is gone. It doesn't mean I'm just going to forget what happened." Marcus nodded, his eyes lowering in acknowledgement. "I understand that. I don't expect you to. I just want you to know I'm sorry. I'll work on doing better." The manager, now realizing that things had shifted in a way he hadn't anticipated, cleared his throat and stepped forward. "We'll make sure you're taken care of from here on out, Ms. Williams. I assure you this won't happen again." Serena took a deep breath. "I don't need your assurances," she said, her gaze moving from Marcus to the manager. "What I need is for this hotel to look at the people who work for you, to look at the way they treat your guests, and to make sure this is the last time someone like me is treated like an outsider." Her words hung in the air. There was no bitterness in her tone, just a clear call for accountability. She had no interest in making a scene, but she also knew that her presence, and the way she had been treated, was an opportunity for real change. It wasn't enough for her to just receive an apology. This was about something bigger, something that could transform how people in power viewed others who didn't fit the mold they were used to. As Serena turned to walk away, heading to her suite, she could feel Marcus's gaze on her. He didn't speak again, But the look in his eyes was different now. She had made him see the error of his ways, not through anger or confrontation, but through her strength, her dignity, and her refusal to accept less than she deserved. Serena didn't have the answers to the world's problems, but this moment, this conversation, was a small victory. She had made someone see beyond their prejudices, even if only for a brief moment. And while the work to eradicate racism in all its forms was far from over, she knew that the first step had been taken. Marcus stood there, rooted in the quiet realization that his own actions, fueled by unconscious biases, had been challenged and changed. The powerful woman he had doubted, the one he had unfairly questioned, had shown him the true meaning of integrity. He was left standing in the lobby, not just reflecting on the mistake he had made, but on the person he now aspired to be. The conflict had reached its peak, and in that moment, there was an undeniable shift, a change that neither Serena nor Marcus would forget. The days following the confrontation left a lasting impact on both Serena Williams and Marcus, the guard. Serena continued her stay at the hotel, and though the incident remained in the back of her mind, she felt empowered knowing that she had spoken up and made a difference. Not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been underestimated or disregarded because of their identity. She realized that sometimes standing up in the face of ignorance wasn't about demanding respect. It was about earning understanding, even from those who initially saw you as less. As for Marcus, the experience became a catalyst for personal growth. He worked harder to confront his own biases, taking responsibility for his actions and seeking to educate himself on the importance of empathy and respect. He no longer wore his uniform with the same sense of superiority, but with a renewed sense of humility. His apology to Serena wasn't just words, it marked a shift in his worldview. This story serves as a reminder that prejudice can be challenged and changed, one moment at a time. It's easy to dismiss people based on assumptions, but real progress comes from learning, listening, and understanding. Serena's bravery and Marcus's reflection offer hope that change is possible, even when it seems impossible.